Good afternoon, everyone. I am Stephanie Valinsky. I'm the Deputy Director here at the Supreme Court Commission on Professionalism. And I'm very excited now to lead a panel that is really going to apply everything we talked about today. So we're going to talk about how attorneys really are applying the lessons that we've discussed today to their practices. So we're calling it value and action. So we hope to really give you some practical takeaways from all that you have learned today. And I'm joined by three excellent panelists who I want to introduce to you all today, who will really be leading the conversation. First is Jess Bednarz, who's the Associate Director of Innovation at the Chicago Bar Foundation. And hey, Jess. And then Erin Levine, who's the CEO and founder of Hello Divorce. Hey, Erin.
Hi.
And finally, Tim Baran, Technology Innovation Program Manager at Pro Bono Net. Hi, Tim. Thank you all so much for joining me. I'm very excited. So just for everyone's awareness, the panel and I will kind of start with some questions, and we'll eventually be taking some questions from the audience. So like you've been doing all day, please feel free to put questions and comments in the chat. So to get started, we've heard a bunch about setting value at the beginning of representation today with Professor Wilkins, and then just with Greg now, how to measure that value. We've heard both those concepts. How do you all put this into action through your work? Tim, why don't you go ahead and take the lead on that one?
Sure, Stephanie. Thanks for the invitation, first of all, to this discussion. It's this great conference, and that's a big question to start this discussion. But you know what? It's a necessary one. It's a good place to start. And I'd have to say, I come to this perspective of providing values with three simple words: empower your client. Right? Empower your client. The executive director of Pro Bono Net, the organization I work with, Mark O'Brien, was on a podcast earlier this week with the one and only Bob Ambrogi. And I really appreciated how he framed this. He said people should be empowered to understand and participate in the resolution of their own problems. Right? People should be empowered to understand and participate in the resolution of their own problems. To preface this discussion, I do want to caution against overly grandiose thinking when considering the question about providing value. The one thing that keeps everyone from adopting anything, whether it be technology or strategies or processes, or what we're talking about here, ideas about providing value, the thing that keeps folks from adopting it is complexity, right? It's too much. As a matter of fact, one of the things I kept seeing in the chat today was, how do we find the time and resources to implement some of these great ideas? So let's keep it very simple, right? Besides obviously doing good, timely, efficient work, which is table stakes, right, for the work that we do, be very clear about three things: pricing, process, and communications. Right? So pricing, any of these could be like number one on that list. But pricing, if you have different pricing models for different services, if you have unbundled services, you need to be clear about that. And process, I'm a bit of a process geek, and you need to align client expectations by sharing information about the process and even the potential bottlenecks and how you'll go about solving that. Let your clients feel ownership of their journey with you through this process. And then communications. Let them know about how you communicate and share documents. So, Martin Sinclair at the beginning of this conference kicked it off and highlighted process and communication, which put an early exclamation point on some of this, on at least two of these items that I'm talking about. And it's much easier to do today with practice management software like Clio, and others to help you to easily gather this information. Here's a tip, speaking of practice management software, from the Legal Trends report from 2021 that Clio put out. 79% of consumers want virtual meetings. 79. That's up from 23% in 2018. And sure, the pandemic was a force multiplier in moving folks to virtual consultations. It's a new normal. It's a value that you add to your client, and that's not going back. And just one last point before I turn it over to you, Erin. Professor Wilkins talked about racial and social justice earlier on in his session, and right on cue. This is New York City, and we have sirens going by. And I just wanted to add this one quick point. Carolyn Elefant, who's written the treatise on building a solo practice, she's talked a lot about, especially recently, about solos and small firms bringing both gender and racial diversity to the space. And that's a value you're bringing, right? Because representation matters. Okay, right now I'll toss it over to you.
Great. Well, Tim, you stole my thunder. Thank you very much for that. No, I agree very much with what you're saying and what Greg said before you. I look at value as, well, I focused on the outcome, and the outcome I've been working on for a very long time, and it's very different from what it once was for me. What it once was, and I think a lot of people can relate to this, is I am going to advocate for my client, I am going to litigate, I'm going to work my butt off, and I'm going to hope that the client appreciates my hard work and all my effort. And let's face it, the stress that we hold for them, right? Because we take on a lot as a lawyer. And that is how I define value, with the hope that they will understand how much I worked for them. And I kind of had to flip that on its head when I founded Hello Divorce, because people weren't coming to Hello Divorce for that particular outcome. They weren't necessarily looking for, can I get that extra $5 in child support? Can I somehow obtain revenge by getting more parenting time than the other parent? Nobody wants a long, messy, ugly legal process, or very few people. They just don't know that there's any other option. And so when I look at value, I look at a couple things. Was the client successful in navigating the legal issue? Meaning, were they able to resolve it affordably, relatively quickly, and conveniently? And not always affordably, I understand that. But for the most part, was it relatively quick and convenient? Did they have the information that they needed? Did they feel safe through the process? And then number two, do they feel better than when they initially came to us? Do they have peace of mind? Anyone can grab a form and slap it online, but how are you changing the experience of law? How are you giving people the value that they need, the information that they need, so that they feel better? They feel more empowered. They feel more comfortable. Even if their lives are sort of all over the place, do they feel some sense of accomplishment? And that is what I look at when I look at value.
Yeah, that's great. And just to add on, I think I'm going to say a lot of the same things. And I'm going to talk from the perspective of the attorneys in our legal incubator program, who are starting firms, socially conscious firms, innovative firms, really trying to serve the middle market. So value really is the foundation of our program, and that one of the main things we're trying to do is provide access and affordability. And those two things in and of themselves are of tremendous value to people. So for example, one of the principles of our program is not billing by the hour and instead offering set fees. And the reason for that is because it does provide tremendous value to everyday people who are on a budget and just need to know up front, can I afford your services or not? So it provides price transparency and predictability. Limited scope has been mentioned earlier today. That's a tremendous way to provide value to legal consumers. Not only can it provide access, because if you're unbundling the services, presumably it's going to be less expensive. Also, if you're pairing that with full scope representation, maybe you're giving the legal consumer two options. There's a lot of value just in that, just in having options, because most attorneys don't offer that. It's just like, here's what we got, full representation or nothing. And again, the average person might not and probably doesn't have the funds for full representation. So there's tremendous value in just offering the choice. things like convenience, which is actually pretty easy. How can you just make things easier and more convenient for people? So that could look like adding calendaring tools to your website so that people don't need to wait between 9 to 5 to get someone on the phone. They can just schedule a meeting right away online. And or maybe you offer electronic payment options. You just make it easy for people to pay you. So those are just some concrete examples, I would say, of how our attorneys are providing value. And I think we just look at value as very expansive. Certainly, our attorneys are providing value by ultimately providing the legal solutions and hoping solving people's legal problems. But we think it's more than that. It's not only the solution, but also the additional value that comes with that solution. So maybe you're, putting a parenting plan together for someone, but what you're ultimately doing is giving someone peace of mind by putting that plan together, or maybe reducing risk in some way. So thinking about that's kind of how we think about value at the JEP.
Thanks. No, great points. And Jess, I think too, you're, talking about, having that kind of value-based mindset at the beginning, the kind of the impact that has for the outcome of the client. How does it make the outcome for attorneys different to kind of have that mindset in your experience?
I think it leads to stronger client relationships, because when you're, like you said, when you've kind of made that mindset shift and you're always starting with the consumer, legal consumer, or your client, everything you're doing is now going to provide value to them. And if you can carry that through in your communications, how you're talking about your services and all the value you're providing, then I think it allows the legal consumer or your client to better understand everything that they're going to get and appreciate your services more, which I think then in turn is better for you as an attorney, because what that's going to lead to is stronger client relationships, just happier clients who will then come back to you for additional work, spread your name through their networks and give you referrals. And a happy client is far less likely to grieve or sue you and much more likely to pay you. So that's what comes to mind for me.
Great. And Erin, for you with Hello Divorce, having kind of that value-based mindset, what's been, some kind of concrete case examples for better outcomes for clients and even better outcomes for you as a practitioner?
Well, I think the first thing we really had to do is embrace the assumption that technology enables value and evolution, and that it's not about taking lawyers completely out of the equation. They're creating and should be part of the product, but using tech for what it does best. So assisting in making things better for the consumer, them keeping track of things, templating emails, providing great information in a variety of different ways, and then also making it easier on lawyers so that we can aggregate data and get good recommendations that go beyond our individual experiences, but what other things the rest of our team has learned. That's much easier to scale. It gives lawyers back a lot of their time and provides an incredible amount of value. So I would say, using the technology to solve various different needs, that would be, that's what I would say.
And what would you say? I see a comment too in the chat, which I know, having an elderly mother myself, how would you, for elderly clients who may not have, the tech capability, or even a client who might not be proficient in that, what are some thoughts on that? And that's open to any one of three of you.
So I think accessibility is something that we need to think about now. And that's, I know we'll get into this, but another really important reason why we need to collaborate with people outside of the law. There were things that I had no idea when I was moving to the online virtual world, like what font you should be using so that people can read it better if they have trouble with that, like what colors to use. And by far, we're not perfect. In fact, we're launching a new site very soon to address these things. But we need to think about accessibility across the board. We also need to think about that there are a lot of people, probably the majority of our consumers, that maybe don't have reliable internet or a desktop at home. And so they're using mobile, they're using their phones. How can we make it as easy as possible for them to be able to do that no matter where they are? I think that's key. As far as like attorney assisted visits online, I can tell you that we're across the board, people tell us into their 60s, 70s, and 80s that if you make it easy enough, it is much easier for them to access their lawyer and legal team and financial experts online than it would be to try to get to the office. So like, I think that's really important. The bottom line is we have to make the tech as easy as possible so that there's no more than a couple clicks, if that, to be able to access the help that you need.
You know, Erin, you really brought up a good point about the digital divide, and that's something we think about a lot when we make at Pro Bono Net products that serves the older adults in the United States, and so you always think mobile first, right? You know, in terms of a value-based mindset, having a human-centered approach, like a human-centered human design approach to this problem is very helpful. So Chief Justice Burke talked about justice navigators earlier. And it reminded me of the time I spent volunteering here in the New York courts as a navigator in housing court. And, you know, everyone I spoke to and everyone I helped, they were relieved, not because the case was resolved, they were relieved and thankful to just have someone to talk to. It just relieved their burden about being there. Even when I didn't have an answer to their problem, they were just being able to help them together find a solution really meant a lot to them. And that's human-centered, right? In an article, and I think I may have posted this article on the site, but in an article called How Design Taught Me to Be a Human-Centered Lawyer, the author, addressing a question about the impact she has on people she interacts with, right, in her role as a lawyer, said, we never discussed anything like this in law school. Instead, we focused on making cases, winning arguments, clerking for the right judge, and then later in big law, we talked about billing hours, closing deals, and so on. She never recalled a time when she was asked, how did your client feel about how you handled that matter? Yeah. How did the lawyer on the other side of that call feel about the interaction? Right? So human-centered lawyers are those who can treat legal problems as human problems and translate that legal complexity, which there are many, into sort of relatable frameworks. And how do you implement that? So one of the things that we're trying to do here in this session is just bring some practical sort of takeaways. So how do you implement something like that? How do you implement this kind of thinking, this design thinking? The key is empathy, you know, and that may seem a little out there, but it's empathy is essential to human-centered design and to human-centered lawyering. Haley in her talk earlier talked about empathy in her discussion and how that's something that lawyers should think about when they're engaging with their clients. Here are 3 questions that you can ask at the conclusion of every engagement. And I know, Erin, you were really great in talking about outcomes, but like if we put outcomes aside for a second and we talk and just asking 3 questions. How satisfied are you with our communication? Key, right? What do you think are the firm's weaknesses? And what do you think are the firm's strengths? Can you imagine capturing that data over the course of years from folks that you engage with? That will allow you to think more proactively about and gather data, and then think and act more proactively about how you can improve your services and add value.
Yeah, and for solo and small firm attorneys, I think it's helpful to think about, if you can, try to select some target markets. Who is it you're ideally trying to serve? And it's exactly that, it's empathy. Then trying to put yourself in their shoes and really understand them. So at the JP, we have a training where we put together a buyer persona or a client persona, if you want to call it that, for target markets. Again, just an exercise to help our attorneys get into that mindset and really understand the needs of their clients, the desires, where they're coming from, because I don't know that you can build a firm or even a product that is going to be able to serve everyone. And I think this conversation highlights that it's really important to have a mix. We need to have a mix of firms and products and services that serve all types, because you're right, there are going to be a lot of elderly people who are not going to use technology, and that's okay. There can be firms that can be built to serve those populations. But I think, again, if you can narrow it down a little bit, doesn't mean you can only serve those people. But I think once you start to approach it that way and really understand your client base, then that'll kind of start to dictate the rest of your firm.
I love the, like, let's ask the client, let's, get their feedback. And, we talk a lot about the Commission on Professionalism in the chat today too, just comparing to the medical profession. I mean, you can't leave a doctor's appointment these days without an immediate text message of what were your impressions of that visit, right? And so I hear what you're saying, and then I also want to ask back to you all. Okay, I'm a busy attorney. How am I'm trying to keep up with my cases, keep my head above water, keep the door open. How am I now going to analyze data and then put it into place, if I'm not at, a firm that has a ton of support to do that, or a person to do that?
I would say, Erin, were you going to go?
Go ahead. It's
okay.
fine.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's go to the research, right? So when I was thinking about this, and in keeping with the theme of just trying to make it simple, not to make it overly complicated, the research bears this out. In a 2012 qualitative study on exploring lawyer-client interaction, there were 5 desirable characteristics for lawyers that were identified. Expertise, which makes sense. Then there was something called independence and decisiveness. And then the last 2 were communications and empathy. So this is going to be very short. This is just me emphasizing that I'm putting an exclamation point on communication and empathy.
Yeah, I think the key to making it work in like small firms or when you're super busy is automation. You don't need to be focused on the results of these customer surveys every single day. You can have it automated. So when you click a button that somebody has finished their legal matter, or maybe is in the middle, that they automatically get a survey, and that data then populates into something as easy as a Google sheet that you can then analyze later. But the bottom line is that lawyers have an average net promoter score of 25. I mean, that is probably one of the worst across any industry. We can only improve. And the way that we can improve is something that we're not usually taught, which is really speaking to and listening to our customers. And if we have time to do, research interviews where we're speaking to them directly, all the better. But if we don't, we can start with a simple survey and start aggregating that data to see where we are missing. Are we providing enough education? Are we providing enough transparency into the legal process? The biggest complaint that we always got was what Stephanie was alluding to, that they sometimes do really well in the medical field, which is like, where am I with things? And what is the next thing that I have to do? If you've ever been on the side of being a client to a lawyer, which I have, it is so frustrating and scary when you don't know what comes next. And so much of that can be automated. And even if it's simply to say, hey, I just want you to know you've done everything you need to do in the moment. I will get back to you when there is a next step that we have to work on. Or we don't have to do anything right now in the moment. However, you might want to start gathering these financial documents because that will be the next step in your divorce. Something as simple as that.
Yeah, there's so much room for probably improvement here. We've already talked about the Clio Trends report. I would just circle back to that and say, and it's not super long and it has graphics and everything. It's a very quick read. Just maybe look through that and see, based off of the information they're providing, are there some quick things that you could do right now? So for example, I don't remember the exact percentages, but with respect to payment plans, it was something 70% of consumers would prefer to have a payment plan, and a smaller percentage of attorneys were offering it. That could be something. Of course, I would also personally advocate that you set it up so that you're getting paid before you finish all of the work, because we do want you to be paid and build sustainable practices too. But also, I think maybe consider thinking just about your messaging, because my guess is you probably are providing a lot of value to legal consumers already, in addition to solving their legal problems, but you might not be communicating it that way. So maybe just a fun exercise. And I just want to throw out, there's this, Bain & Company has this elements of value pyramid. It's this interactive graphic that I just think is really fun. If you have a spare 5 minutes, maybe check it out, because it's gone through like 30 other industries, sadly not legal yet, but it's rooted in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and basically it's talking about all the different types of value you can offer. So maybe that will, again, spark some creative juices and make you think about some of the things that you are offering, and there's certainly things that are in other industries too. And just think about how you're currently communicating that with clients. Think to the messaging on your website. Is there a way that you could just make really small tweaks to help your clients understand all the value that you're going to be offering them? Of course, if you're offering set fees, it'd be great to put that on there. Even if you're offering hourly rates, frankly, again, the average legal consumer has no idea how much stuff costs. So if you can even somehow give them a ballpark, that would be a very small and easy thing to do that would provide a lot of value. So I think just one thing you could think about is your messaging.
I love that, Jessica. I absolutely love that, because I think that as lawyers, we oftentimes overlook anything that isn't like not related to like the, our litigation technique or how we negotiate. There's so much more that we hold and do for clients, or that our office does, or that our technology does. And we need to message that and make sure that people know and value it, because it is really important.
Absolutely. And I don't know about you guys, but I find people who are not attorneys kind of just assume the average lawyer already is going to do those things. They kind of just assume that we have a base level competence, and that's probably a good thing, because we should. So moving on to the rest of the value, I think is really helpful. So just something to throw out there.
And to take that even a little further, we have a question in the comments that really gets to, predicting. It's unreliable how you can predict the case, how long the case will take. So, how can I deliver value when I can't predict if a case will take, 6 months or 6 years? And, really so much, there's so many variables. So then if I am going to set a price, how do I go about doing that?
Yeah, I can do a quick answer, but then I'm going to direct you to a resource that the Chicago Bar Foundation put together called the Pricing Toolkit. You can go to www.thepricingtoolkit.com. And I'll also just pull from another industry really quickly. So absolutely, every case is different, and there are certainly a lot of variables, more so in some practice areas than others. But other industries have the same problem and have to deal with the same thing. So a very familiar one is the airline industry. They have to consider over 60 variables every time they put a set fee on a plane ticket. Some of those variables are quite variable, like weather and maintenance. And yet the airline industry has the data on, all of that stuff in the past. And I would say we as attorneys, unless you're a brand new attorney, and if you are, pair up with a mentor, we have data that we can look at too, to see what those variables are. And it's just all about anticipating them on the front end and building it in. So we kind of walk through it, at least the way that we see it, in the pricing toolkit step by step. So I recommend checking that out. But, just if it's truly unpredictable, you can do simple things too, like maybe just for the first phase of the case, you offer a set fee until you have more information, more about opposing counsel, the judge, the variables, et cetera. And then maybe once you get there, you can offer some sort of set fee based on that. But I'll stop there because I could talk about this probably for hours.
But you know what, Jessica, but sharing that uncertainty is part of that communication, right? So when you're communicating about pricing and about if you take it in project management terms like scope, right? It doesn't, you don't have to be exact if you don't know. That just sharing that uncertainty and why you have that uncertainty and the potential solutions, that alone is meaningful to a client.
I agree.
And doing it more than once, because especially at the start of a lawsuit, the customer is going through so much emotionally and financially and everything else. So what they might take out of a conversation at the start is not what they will take out later when you're doing a cost benefit analysis to determine whether it makes sense to litigate. So the ongoing communication is a great way to add value. And I agree with Jessica, like to the extent that we can do flexible offerings and explain why we have these flexible offerings is going to be really helpful to adding value.
For sure. And we've put the pricing toolkit that Jess has in the comments I see. And Erin, there's a comment as well to just, someone would like to hear a little bit more about how Hello Divorce works, and to see if, right, is there a way they can implement that in, legal aid or even in their own practice?
Sure. So the way we think about divorce, or the way at Hello Divorce, is not just handling the legal experience, but also looking at it like a big life transformation. This is a big event. And while everybody who goes through divorce has to go through the legal process, they're also thinking about all these other things, like I need to get a new insurance plan. I might need to move. Where are my kids going to go to school? What will the legal process look like? Will I have to go to court? So the first thing that we do, generally through content, is provide people the information they need to help them solve a particular pain point or reduce overwhelm and emotion. Because when we are scared, we make really irrational decisions, like maybe lawyer up with the most aggressive lawyer in town when that might not be the best fit for us. So that's the first thing we do, is really try to reduce that overwhelm. We also recognize that the stats are in. People consider or try to save their marriage for 2 to 5 years before they file divorce. And during that time, they're oftentimes Googling. And so our goal is not to encourage people to divorce. Our goal is to give people during that time information that will help them in the decision-making process. And then when it comes to the legal product itself, we have various different tiers depending on the complexity of the interpersonal relationship and the complexity of the assets. So somebody could use the DIY app just to move through the entire divorce process if they have, relatively low or no assets. Maybe they don't have kids. Maybe they think they'll come to an agreement pretty quick. But the vast majority of our users use our Pro plan. And what that is they use the software to prepare all of their forms. And then an account coordinator jumps in to coordinate service with the spouse, to navigate the complicated submission guidelines, like filing the documents in court, and mailing them in, hole punching them if necessary, stapling them. Sometimes you can do e-signatures, sometimes you can't. So navigating those rules. And then the consumer can add on to the extent that they need. So maybe they would like an hour or two with a lawyer to review their paperwork before they file that final agreement. Or maybe they need some help negotiating a resolution with their spouse. Or maybe they need a mediator, which we also incorporate to help resolve conflict. And then finally, we have financial experts who can help people with everything from modeling support scenarios to valuing retirement plans and that kind of thing. So at this point, because of legal regulations, we can't do the actual representation. So if there is a very messy divorce, or one where it's very problematic, maybe there's major mental health issues, or a spouse is a narcissist, and for real, a narcissist, everyone thinks they're married to one, but like for real, we can't do those types of divorces. But 95% of divorces at one point or another settle. Our goal is to get people through their divorce with the least amount of conflict possible, even though conflict is inevitable.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. And I think you kind of lead into what really are some of the obstacles? You all are doing very innovative work, and so what are the obstacles and opportunities facing others trying to deliver services in innovative ways like you do?
Well, I think for us, I think the biggest obstacle are regulations. I don't have all the answers. I don't have the solution here. I don't think that adding more pro bono hours to an already busy lawyer's plate is necessarily the answer either. I think we're going to have to innovate a lot to figure out what works best to help solve that access to justice gap. But one thing that is not working very well for us is the regulations, and particularly those around unauthorized practice of law and around fee splitting. Because what it means is that in order for lawyers to innovate, they have to do one of two things, truly innovate. They have to either do it on their own dime, because we're not allowed to bring in equity investors into law firms, or they have to build a corporation that's outside of a law firm. And when you do that, that becomes problematic in many ways too. So just like as an example, through Hello Divorce, which is a corporation, we can partner with a law firm entity to provide legal services. But the employees that work for Hello Divorce, even those that have been paralegals or lawyers for 15, 20 years, can't use their legal knowledge to help people through divorce. They can't do any of that. And they can provide legal information, but they can't apply it to the specific circumstance of the customer, which is really problematic and challenging. So, what I'd love to see is a regulatory framework that gives a clear line of sight of who's delivering services and who's delivering the tech and how is it regulated, and allow lawyers to be integrated into the whole service, to be bound by the same ethical regulations that lawyers who work for law firms are, but simply allow them to explore other opportunities like working for a company focused on providing legal help.
Yeah, I think Erin nailed it. And those were really great examples. And just a couple things, I guess, to point out is I think oftentimes when people hear regulatory reform, they immediately think of the legal consumer. This is only access to justice. It's hurting attorneys. But Erin herself is an attorney. She is the brainchild behind Hello Divorce, and she herself is running into these obstacles. So regulatory reform, and at least the way we were looking at it here in Illinois, it's really meant not only to help legal consumers, but also to help lawyers, because lawyers do have a really important place in the delivery of legal services. And I'll also just say, we kind of talked about earlier about how we need a mix of solutions, and we need all hands on deck. And I mean, all hands, not just lawyers, because clearly what we have done up to date, it's not working. We have a market failure, and there's a huge group of people who don't have access. And we want lawyers to continue to be part of those solutions, but I think we need to bring others in too. And I think the less restriction that we can have, the better. We're lucky here in Illinois that, we put together a task force that did make some recommendations to the Illinois Supreme Court. And they did respond favorably and move the majority of those on to committee work. So we're hoping to hear back from those committees with their implementation plan soon. But I have a relative example right now, just for myself, in that we're currently recruiting for our June 2022 cohort for our incubator program. And we haven't read the application. We have an attorney who wants to create some sort of legal product to supplement his firm, at least initially, focus on consumer debt, but has the concerns that Erin just outlined. Like, can I do this? And the answer is yes, but
expect to spend a lot.
Yes, these are the obstacles that we're going to run into. And that's just disheartening, and it's frustrating because that's not helpful. I think if the average legal consumer knew that this conversation was going on, they just would shake their heads. It doesn't make sense.
And what makes me really nervous too is that lawyers are well positioned and should be a part of this conversation. In fact, leading this conversation. And yet, because our hands are tied to a certain extent, other people who are not lawyers and don't understand the complexity and the nuances of the system and the procedure are innovating. It's easier for them to do it than us. And that concerns me. We cannot be left out of this equation. It's very important for us to be a part of it. Obviously, I'm passionate about this and I can go on a long time, so I'll stop there.
Tim, I saw you were going to chime in there at one point. I think you might be on mute.
I'm just doing snaps to what Erin said.
Let me unmute myself. So yeah, Erin, when you talked about Hello Divorce, I was thinking, wow, that's a human-centered design approach to helping to folks, right? Because you have this like whole ecosystem, and then when you talked about a regulatory reform, it's such an uphill battle. I mean, look at what happened with, I'm in the nonprofit space now, and even legal aid organizations, like they filed a brief in that Upsolve case, right? I mean, it was just startling to see. There's some elements of it that I get. So it's going to be an uphill battle. I mean, in the nonprofit space, in that legal nonprofit space, I mean, we do there's massive collaboration. So anything that we build, anything that we are trying to innovate, it's not just lawyers, or it's not just paralegals, or not just any one sector or any one segment of the population. It's lawyers, it's human services, it's social services, it's adult protection services. And we collaborate and then create something out of that. But then, in order for that, whatever it is that we create to function effectively, we have to there are all of these, right? Like to your point, Erin, all of these hurdles of regulations that we have to go past. Even in a simple thing like law students, being able to, law students in New York, they have to satisfy 50 hours now of pro bono services in order to graduate from law school, and which is a great initiative. But they can't offer advice, obviously, right? But we found ways around that, right? Ways that law students can serve in a meaningful way without offering advice. A way that we can get information from social services to then create something that would be meaningful to the constituents that they serve. So, I mean, there are opportunities out there, but it takes a lot of creative thinking.
For sure. And I like there's a great question in the chat about kind of the value of managing and training other attorneys, right? So the question points out, as a younger lawyer, that managing attorneys might not have been able to train and manage well. And really, I think that's another skill we do not learn in law school. And, how do you guys all think effectively can, attorneys really teach lawyers to do the kind of work you're talking about? You're going to learn some of it in law school, but then how do you take that mentality into, your first couple of years of, practice where you can get trained by other attorneys?
I'm gonna, one of the things, this is just what I discovered the other day. Some of the things that we're talking about in terms of process, in terms of trying to figure out what is your what's the life cycle of a case. You may not always be able to tell exactly, but there are ways that you can identify that through. There's a lot of methods that you can use. A really great resource is from Practicing Law Institute. So before joining, becoming a program manager in the legal nonprofit space, I wasn't really aware or keenly aware of all of the elements of project management. But if you can bring project management into your practice, I tell you, it'll make a world of difference. And in fact, there's a coming out of that project management space, there's something specifically called legal project management, and it's applying those principles to legal services and legal products. Practicing Law Institute has a really great. If you just go to pli.edu and you enter project management, you'll see our legal project management. You'll see, and I think it's free, like a 6-hour course on just legal project management. I think it'll be really helpful.
Thank you. Thank you. And there's also a great question in the chat as well that kind of brings together what you all have been talking about, the human-centered design and design lawyering. What is the interface between design lawyering and analytics?
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, did anyone, I know that the session before this, Greg was talking about what you can, what is it, something about if you can't measure it, you can resolve it or move forward. And analytics is a bit of a beast, right? So it's really important to always capture as much data as you want. There's so many different tools that we build. There's so many different services that we offer. And there's two sets of analytics that you always have to be thinking about. There's the quantitative side and the qualitative side, right? So, if you're using Google Analytics, for instance, you'll be able, and attaching it to any products and services that you offer, creating events within Google Analytics. So when someone clicks on this, there's another like qualitative data that you can gather through creating, like just using Google Forms. Google Forms is brilliant for creating a survey, right? A list of questions that you ask every time you conclude a case, or even during, or maybe you convene a cohort of personas, if you will. Personas would be potential clients. And have them run through some questions with you, and then gather that data over time. It just automatically feeds into a Google Sheet, a spreadsheet, and then analyze it over time. So these are all methods, right? And don't ever think that the only kind of data that you can capture are hard numbers, right? You need qualitative data takes a lot more effort to parse and to think about. But it's also very rich, right? So in terms of informing you of how you can improve, how you can add more value.
Yeah, I mean, I think that analytics are sort of woven in to every aspect of how you practice your product development, how you improve customer service. It's kind of always there. And you could use that data to help the company, to help the lawyers, and to help the consumer. So I always say, like, think outside of your legal network. You have lawyers, you know the law, you're good there, but like start listening to podcasts, reading books like The Lean Startup to start getting more comfortable with data. Because when we're able to say something to our customer, like, I can't tell you whether or not to hire a lawyer, but what I can tell you is 95% of the consumers who used our software hire a lawyer when they have a complicated retirement plan. That's really helpful to them and really helpful to you, and to be able to keep your lawyers busy and make sure that the customer gets the help that they need.
Yeah, and just to highlight again, I know we already brought this up, but I guess on the back end, just to be collecting some data too, more qualitative from the client. Ask them questions about your services. When we talk about pricing, a very easy question to ask is, how did the value you received compare with the price that you paid? Very straightforward, and you're going to find out right away, was it too expensive? Was it spot on? Or was it a steal? That right there is immediate feedback on the value you're providing. And I think you could do that with other things too. So just wanted to highlight that again too.
And expect to iterate on pricing. Expect that that you're not going to get it right, and to start, and keep trying different things.
Yeah. And if you could build feedback loops into the process and not just do things on the front end and back end, but if you could do it throughout, I think that's even better, because then you can iterate on the spot. And if you get some negative feedback, like, well, actually, no, this isn't working out, well, then you have an opportunity to course correct during the representation. So by the time, or during the service, so by the time that they're at the end of it, they're in a much better spot, and you learn a lot from that too.
And as you guys say that, of course, my being with the Commission on Professionalism, I turn to the model rules a bit, and I love you guys you really value the always be testing mindset, and again, like we've talked about, right? Again, lawyers not trained in that way. It's very it's definitely easier in the tech world. So for those out there thinking, all right, in the legal profession, I am dealing like with Erin, divorce cases. These are clients' cases, livelihoods, things are on the line. And this whole notion of kind of testing and failure, is that really an option for me? Because, wouldn't that even be considered a potential violation of, just your general 1.1 rule of competence? How do you guys reconcile that in the work you do?
I think that's a good question, because I think a lot of people probably wonder the same thing. How do I reconcile those two things? And from at least like the law firm owner perspective, I would say that as a law firm owner, you're wearing two hats, right? You're wearing your lawyer hat and you're wearing your business hat. And when you have your lawyer hat on, it probably makes everything you just said makes a ton of sense, right? You don't want to make mistakes. You want to avoid those if you can. Perfectionism is a better thing in that hat. But when if you're an owner, you have to take that hat off and put on your business owner hat. And then suddenly things are different. It's a different conversation. Actually, experimentation and failure is a good thing. And just to be clear, we're not talking about taking risks, betting the farm, betting the whole firm types of risks. We're talking about smaller calculated risks. And I would venture to say that a lot of the things maybe you read about bigger companies in the news, a lot of those risks are probably pretty calculated risks. They're not just on a whim. So again, we're talking about calculated risks. And that is, I think, how you learn. And, certainly, again, just going back to not billing by the hour, our attorneys are failing all the time because it's hard. It can be done, but it takes a while to learn that type of stuff. But I think as a profession, it would be super helpful if we could be more supportive in that respect. And that's what incubator programs certainly provide. It's that supportive space where people can fail and feel safe and learn. And I think if we, as a profession, can shift our mindset, and instead of, I shared with Stephanie, I really like this Teddy Roosevelt quote, "The man in the arena." Instead of, the profession kind of sitting on the outskirts and looking in, I think we need to be the people in the arena, the people who are actually experimenting. That's where the action is at. That's where we need to be if we want to be relevant.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think we have to be aware we definitely have to be aware of the rules of professional conduct, but we can't let that stop us. And there are plenty of things that we can do that don't invoke issues with the rules. So, and you'd be surprised how little the tweaks you can make in your practice that have big, amazing results. So one example would be to optimize your marketing funnels. If somebody is searching, should I stay or should I go for divorce, then they don't want to be sent immediately to the pricing page, right? They're not in the space. And so what can you provide them at that point? You can provide them education about some of the issues that they may be facing, some of the fears that they may be experiencing, all of those kind of things. So just little tweaks that you can make within your practice to build brand trust, so that when and if they need you, they'll come to you, or they'll be your brand evangelist. They'll tell their friend or their mother or their student, "Hey, listen, I heard about X brand or X lawyer, and they seem to really get it and provide value and have that empathy. You should check them out."
Yeah, just to add on that, Erin, I'm by the way, Jess, props on working Roosevelt and Maslow into your presentation.
Bravo.
Yeah. So in terms of testing, Erin, I second that. So it's not only about process and about how you go through a case. And you have to take obviously the rules of professional conduct into consideration, but in terms of how you even present information to potential clients, right? Something that I learned when I got into the nonprofit space was this whole idea about plain language, not lawyerly language. I'm talking about plain language. It's a whole other level. I it's really, and I made a note of it, the average reading level of adult Americans is at an 8th grade level. And experts recommend that your webpage be at a 6th grade reading level. I wager a guess that most web pages aren't. And a really great tool is called Write Clearly. Open Advocate puts this out, and it helps you to test the reading grade level of a web page. So that's at openadvocate.org, and it's Write Clearly. Check it out.
Excellent. No, that is a great resource. And as we kind of begin to wind down here, I know I have a ton of more questions, but I guess to kind of leave it again with going back to the practical, what would each of you say is, one or two things, the attendees can, after they leave today, can, either reflect on or really put into practice that are kind of immediate things?
I'll start with two things.
All right, Tim,
one is, for sure, consider moving to virtual consultations. I mean, if you don't move to virtual consultations, even in the legal aid space, the legal nonprofit space, we've started to build tools for legal consultations, and it's something that we're getting a lot of inquiries about, and increasing adoption. There's a lot of work to do with that, but there's a lot of tools out there. Even some of the law practice management software are including those components now, right? Or at least as an additions on. And the other part is, you had mentioned, and I've gone a little deep, like consistently, like sort of like repeating this, is always try to gather feedback when you can. So whenever you have an engagement, whenever even if you're thinking about building a new website, or if you're thinking about like moving to another pricing model, or anything that you're thinking about, frame it in terms of maybe 3 or 4 questions, and then send out a survey to whoever you're engaged with. It doesn't matter if like 1 month you get 1 and another month you get 2. Think about it, the cumulative effect over years, the kind of data that you can get and that you can that would be so valuable that you can learn from.
Those are some great examples, and Jessica gave some earlier today too. Adding a calendar link on your website, being transparent with pricing. So there's like lots of little things you can do, and don't get overwhelmed, or we're all overwhelmed. That's what we do as lawyers. We overthink everything, but like you just have to start, right? One step at a time. So the way I started, for what it's worth, is I wanted to solve one pain point that the consumer was experiencing. So in family law, that was, what do I put in my co-parenting agreement, or what, so then we made a worksheet, and you can easily make a worksheet on your own using Canva or hiring a great intern. The thing that the rest of the world can't do that we can is know the hard part, the content to put in that stuff, right? But then getting it designed, is very easy to do these days. Upwork, Canva, doing it on your own. So I think, just like start with like one product, or one freemium, or one worksheet, or one lead generator, something that you can offer that helps your target consumer with a pain point that they are experiencing.
Yeah, and I think I'll just go a little even higher level, and maybe just trying to move to that value-based mindset. And maybe it's something as simple as challenging yourself once a day. Might be a little much to start, maybe even just once a week. How can I increase value to my target markets? Just maybe put a reminder on your calendar or something, if that's how you need to start developing that habit. But I think just even making that mindset shift to always just starting with the customer, the client, and working backwards will be huge. I think that's a huge part of it, like 90% of it. 90% of anything, I think, is mindset. So I think if you can start doing that, I think that could be really helpful too.
Excellent way to end it, for sure. Thank you very much, Tim, Erin, and Jess. I really appreciate it. And thank you to all of the attendees too for your engaging comments and questions.